The emergency lights cast long red shadows across the council chamber as 12 different alien species argued about death. Commander Jake Morrison sat quietly in his chair, watching the chaos unfold around the massive circular table. His uniform felt heavy against his shoulders as he listened to the same arguments they had heard for months. Admiral Vextar slammed his clawed fist against the metal surface. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. His reptilian features twisted with anger as he spoke in his thick accent. 3 months. 3 months since my battle fleet vanished into that cursed void. 47 ships. 12,000 of my finest warriors, gone without a single distress call. The insectoid Queen Zakth clicked her mandibles together in a rhythm that sounded like machine gun fire. Her compound eyes reflected the red emergency lighting as she turned toward the draconian admiral. Your losses are noted, but they are not unique. The Hive Collective has sacrificed 6 exploration groups to that region. Our sister queens and their broods consumed by whatever lurks in that darkness. Jake watched the exchange with growing frustration. They called it the dead zone because nothing that went in ever came back out. At least nothing bigger than a couple of ships. For 40 years, the mysterious sphere of space had been swallowing fleets whole. No wreckage. No survivors. No answers. The dead zone sat in neutral territory, roughly 50 light years across in every direction. It looked normal from the outside. Stars, planets, the usual cosmic background radiation. But something was wrong with the space inside. Sensors stopped working. Communications cut out completely. Ships that entered in groups of 3 or more simply disappeared. Dr. Lisa Harper leaned forward in her seat next to Jake. She had been studying the holographic display that showed the dead zone. For the past hour, her fingers moved across her tablet, running calculations and cross-referencing data. Jake knew that look. Lisa had found something. The pattern is clear, she whispered to Jake while the aliens continued their shouting match. Look at the timeline. Every fleet that vanished had more than 2 ships. Every single one. Jake glanced at the data on her tablet. She was right. The Zinthari had lost a battle group of 8 ships last week. Before that, the Ethereal Communion had sent her research. Fleet of 5 vessels, all gone. But smaller expeditions sometimes made it through. Single ships returned with blank sensor logs and confused crews, who remembered nothing about their passage through the zone. Captain Ryan Blake entered the chamber as the arguments reached their peak. His presence commanded attention even among the alien dignitaries. Blake had a reputation that stretched across the galaxy. He was the human who had negotiated the peace between the crystalline entities and the metal worlds. The man who had discovered 3 new habitable planets and established first contact with 2 previously unknown species. Blake walked to the human delegation section and took his seat. His eyes met Jake's briefly, a silent question passing between them. Jake nodded toward Lisa, who was still studying her data with intense concentration. We must act, Admiral Vextar continued his speech. The dead zone threatens all of our shipping lanes. My people demand justice for our fallen warriors. The holographic figure of an ethereal being shimmered into existence above the table. These creatures of pure energy rarely took physical form. But the dead zone situation had drawn their attention. Justice implies knowledge of the guilty party. We have no evidence of intent. Perhaps this is a natural phenomenon. Natural? Queen Zakth's voice rose to a shriek. What natural force selectively destroys large groups while allowing smaller vessels to pass? This is the work of an intelligence. A hostile one. Jake found himself agreeing with the insect queen. The pattern was too specific to be random. Something in the dead zone was hunting fleets. But what could destroy entire battle groups without leaving any trace? The debate continued for another hour. Each species had lost ships, crews, and valuable resources to the mysterious region. The economic impact was starting to hurt interstellar trade. Several important shipping routes had been abandoned because they passed too close to the dead zone's boundaries. Blake finally stood up. The chamber fell silent as all eyes turned to the human captain. He was not the biggest or strongest being in the room, but something about him commanded respect. "We're asking the wrong questions," Blake said in his calm, steady voice. "Instead of arguing about what's in there, we should be asking why it's there. What is worth protecting so fiercely? That something is willing to destroy entire fleets?" The alien representatives looked at each other with confusion. Admiral Vextar growled low in his throat. "You think something is being protected, not merely destroyed for sport or territory." Lisa looked up from her tablet. "Captain Blake is right. The pattern suggests selective elimination. If the goal was simply to destroy all traffic, single ships would be targeted too. But they're not. Whatever is in there has specific criteria for what constitutes a threat." The ethereal being's form flickered with what might have been interest. "An intriguing theory, Dr. Harper, but it raises more questions than it answers. What could be valuable enough to justify such extreme protection measures?" Jake watched as Blake and Lisa exchanged glances. He could see the wheels turning in their minds. They were planning something. Something dangerous and probably unauthorized. The council session ended without any resolution. The alien species returned to their ships and their home worlds. No. Closer to solving the mystery than when they started. Jake followed Blake and Lisa to a quiet corner of the station's observation deck. The dead zone was visible through the massive transparasteel windows. It looked like empty space, but Jake knew better. Somewhere in that darkness, thousands of beings had met their fate. The question was whether they were dead or something worse. "You're thinking about going in there," Jake said. It wasn't a question. Blake nodded slowly. "The Defense is equipped for deep space research. We have better sensors than most military vessels and a crew trained for first contact situations." "The Council will never approve it," Jake warned. "Earth Command would court-martial you before you reach the edge of the system." "Then we don't ask permission," Lisa said quietly. "How many more fleets are going to disappear while the politicians argue? How many more lives will be lost because we're too afraid to seek answers?" Jake looked out at the dead zone again. The smart thing would be to report this conversation to his superiors. Let Earth Command know that one of their captains was planning to go rogue. But Jake had served with Blake before. He knew the man's judgment was sound, even when his decisions seemed insane. "What makes you think you can succeed where entire battle fleets have failed?" Jake asked. Blake smiled grimly. "Because we're not going in as conquerors or explorers. We're going in as one small ship with a specific mission. If Lisa is right about the selection criteria, we might be small enough to avoid whatever is hunting the larger groups. And if she's wrong, then we'll disappear like all the others. But at least we'll have tried. Sometimes that's all you can do." Jake made his decision. He had the authority to authorize deep space missions for research purposes. It was a stretch, but he could provide Blake with the legal cover he needed to launch his expedition. "I'll prepare the paperwork," Jake said. "Official research mission to investigate spatial anomalies in the neutral zone. The Council doesn't need to know exactly which anomaly you're planning to study." Lisa smiled for the first time since entering the dead zone data. "Thank you, Jake. This could change everything. If we can find out what's really happening in there, we might be able to save lives instead of just losing more." Blake shook Jake's hand firmly. "We launch in 12 hours. Whatever's waiting for us in the dead zone, humanity is going to face it head on." As they walked back through the station corridors, Jake wondered if he had just signed death warrants for Blake and his crew. But he also knew that someone had to take the risk. Someone had to be willing to fly into the unknown and seek answers. Where others saw only death, the dead zone had been consuming fleets for 40 years. Tomorrow, one human ship would go in anyway. Captain Ryan Blake stood in the briefing room aboard the UES Defiance, looking at the faces of his senior staff. The ship hummed quietly around them as they prepared for what might be their final mission. Through the viewport, Blake could see other vessels maintaining a safe distance from the dead zone's edge. None of them would follow where the Defiance was about to go. The Defiance was not like other ships in the human fleet. Built for exploration and research, she carried the most advanced sensor equipment Earth could produce. Her hull was reinforced with experimental materials designed to withstand unknown forces. Her crew of 87 included scientists, diplomats, and soldiers all trained for first contact situations. Chief Engineer Sam Rodriguez pulled up a holographic display of the ship's systems. His weathered face showed concern as he pointed to various components. "Captain, I've done everything I can to prepare our systems. The fusion drives are running at peak efficiency. The experimental shielding generators are online. But I have to be honest with you. We don't know what we're flying into." Blake nodded. Sam had been with him for 7 years. The man knew how to keep a ship running under impossible conditions. If Sam was worried, there was good reason to be. Navigation Officer Kate Williams stepped forward with her datapad. Her calculations covered the screen in complex mathematical formulas. "Sir, plotting a course through the dead zone is unlike anything we've attempted before. Normal navigation relies on star positions and gravitational references. Inside the zone, our sensors go blind. We'll be flying by instinct and basic momentum." "How long will it take to cross the zone?" Blake asked. "At standard cruising speed. Approximately 18 hours to reach the center and 18 hours to exit the far side. But that assumes we maintain course and speed without any complications." Dr. Lisa Harper looked up from her research notes. She had been studying the dead zone data for weeks, searching for patterns that others had missed. "Captain, I believe the key is in the disappearance patterns. Every fleet that vanished had more than 2 ships. The zone's defenses, whatever they are, seem to ignore smaller groups." Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner shifted uncomfortably in his chair. As Blake's second in command, he was responsible for pointing out the risks and alternatives. "Sir, I have to state for the record that this mission was not authorized by Earth Command or the Galactic Council. If we survive this, we could all face court-martial." Blake met his gaze steadily. "Noted, Alex. Anyone who wants to transfer off this ship can do so now. No questions asked, no black marks on their service record." The room fell silent. Blake waited, watching each face carefully. These people had volunteered for dangerous missions before, but this was different. This was flying into a region that had swallowed entire battle fleets without a trace. Sam Rodriguez spoke first. "I've been working on these engines for 7 years, Captain. I want to see how they perform against whatever's in there." Kate Williams nodded agreement. "My calculations got us here safely. They'll get us through the zone too." One by one, the rest of the senior staff voiced their commitment to the mission. Blake felt a surge of pride in his crew. They knew the risks, but they also understood the importance of seeking answers. "Dr. Harper," Blake said, "tell us about your theory." Lisa activated her data display. The holographic projection showed the dead zone as a perfect sphere in space. Red markers indicated the locations where fleets had vanished. The pattern is very specific. Large military formations disappear completely. Scientific expeditions with multiple ships vanish without a trace. But single vessels and pairs sometimes make it through. "Sometimes?" Alex asked. "About 60%. Survival rate for single ships, 80% for pairs. But the survivors always report the same thing. Complete sensor blackout during passage. No memory of what happened inside the zone. It's as if something is selectively editing their experiences." Communications Officer Beth Collins frowned as she studied the data. "That suggests an intelligence." Behind the disappearances. Something smart enough to distinguish between different types of threats. Blake walked to the viewport and stared out at the dead zone. From this distance, it looked like normal space. Stars twinkled in the background. A few planets orbited their distant suns. Nothing suggested the danger that lurked within. "There's something else," Lisa continued. "I've been analyzing the gravitational readings from the zone's edge. There are massive objects inside, not planets or asteroids. Something artificial, something huge." The implications hit everyone at once. If there were large artificial structures inside the dead zone, it meant they were dealing with advanced technology. Possibly hostile technology that had been eliminating threats for decades. Blake turned back to his crew. "We launch in 2 hours. Full stealth mode until we cross the boundary. Once we're inside, we maintain communications silence unless we discover something critical." The senior staff dispersed to their stations. Blake remained in the briefing room with Lisa and Alex. They had served together long enough to communicate without words, and both of his officers had questions they didn't want to ask in front of the others. "Ryan," Alex said quietly, "what if we're wrong about the size limitation? What if the Defiance is big enough to trigger whatever is hunting the fleets?" Blake had considered that possibility. The Defiance was larger than most single ships that had made it through the zone. But she was also much smaller than the smallest fleet that had vanished. They were gambling that whatever was inside used specific criteria to identify threats. "Then we'll find out quickly," Blake replied. "But I don't think that's the case. Lisa's analysis is sound. Something in there is protecting something else. The question is what?" Lisa pulled up another display. This one showed energy readings from the zone's center. "Captain, there's something I didn't mention in the briefing. The gravitational anomalies aren't random. They're arranged in a pattern around a central point. Whatever is being protected is at the heart of the dead zone." Blake studied the readings. Lisa was right. The massive objects formed a defensive perimeter around something at the zone's core. Something that generated its own energy signature. "How big is the central object?" Blake asked. "Roughly the size of Earth's moon. But the energy output is unlike anything in our databases. It's not a star or a planet. It's something else entirely." Alex whistled softly. "A moon-sized artificial object surrounded by defensive platforms. We're not just flying into the unknown. We're flying into what might be the most advanced military installation in the galaxy." Blake felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders. He was about to risk 87 lives on a theory. But the alternative was to let the mystery continue claiming more victims. Every week that passed meant more fleets would vanish. Into the dead zone, the ship's intercom crackled to life. "Captain to the bridge. We're approaching the dead zone boundary." Blake led his officers to the bridge. The main view screen showed the edge of the mysterious region. It looked like a wall of normal space, but the sensor readings told a different story. Energy patterns flickered at the boundary like heat waves rising from hot pavement. "All stations report ready, Captain," Beth Collins announced from the communications. "Station." Blake settled into the captain's chair. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency. These people trusted him to lead them through whatever lay ahead. He hoped their faith was not misplaced. "Take us in, Kate. Nice and easy." The Defiance moved forward slowly. Blake watched the sensor displays as they approached the boundary. Everything looked normal until they crossed the invisible line. Then the universe changed around them. The stars vanished instantly, replaced by a gray void that seemed to absorb light itself. The ship's sensors went completely dead. Emergency lighting kicked in as the main displays flickered and died. "Sensor blackout confirmed," Sam Rodriguez reported from engineering. "All external monitoring systems are non-functional." Blake felt the ship around him, but he could no longer see where they were going. They were flying blind through space. That didn't behave according to normal physics. Steady as she goes, Kate. Maintain course and speed. The bridge crew worked in tense silence as the Defiance moved deeper into the dead zone. Whatever had claimed so many fleets was out there in the gray void, waiting for them to make a mistake. Blake gripped the arms of his captain's chair and prepared to face the unknown. The Defiance drifted through the gray void like a ship lost in fog. Captain Blake stood on the bridge, watching his crew work by emergency lighting. Outside the viewports, there was nothing but emptiness. No stars, no planets, no reference points of any kind. They were truly alone in a place that seemed to exist outside normal space. Time since entry? Blake asked. 4 hours, 17 minutes. Kate Williams replied from the navigation station. Her instruments were useless, but she kept track of their progress using basic mathematics and the ship's internal CHRONOMETER. Dr. Lisa Harper worked frantically at the science station. She had been trying to adapt their instruments for hours, but conventional sensors simply could not function in this environment. The gray void seemed to absorb all forms of electromagnetic radiation. "Captain," Lisa called out, "I have an idea. Our sensors are failing because they rely on electromagnetic signals. But biological neural patterns might work differently in this space." Blake walked over to her station. "What are you thinking, Doctor?" "The experimental neural interface technology we've been developing for first contact situations. If I can link my brain directly to the ship's sensor array, I might be able to detect things that our instruments cannot." Chief Engineer Sam Rodriguez looked up from his console. "Doc, that technology is still in testing phase. We don't know what kind of neural feedback you might experience. We also don't know what's lurking out there in the void," Lisa replied. "This could be our only way to see what's coming." Blake considered the risks. The neural interface was designed to help human diplomats communicate with alien species that used different forms of thought patterns. But it had never been tested in an environment like this. "Do it," Blake decided. "But at the first sign of neural stress, we disconnect immediately." Lisa nodded and began setting up the neural interface equipment. She attached sensor nodes to her temples and connected the main cable to the ship's computer systems. The process took 20 minutes of careful calibration. "Beginning neural link," Lisa announced. Blake watched the monitors as Lisa's brain patterns appeared on the displays. Her neural activity spiked as she made contact with the ship's sensor array. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her eyes went wide. "Captain," she whispered, "there are structures out there. Massive structures. They're everywhere." "What kind of structures?" "Artificial, geometric. They're the size of small moons, but they're not natural formations. They're machines of some kind." Blake felt his heart rate increase. "How many?" "Dozens. Maybe hundreds. They're arranged in patterns around us, like they're watching or waiting for something." Communications Officer Beth Collins tried to establish contact with the structures. Her equipment remained silent, but she kept trying different frequencies and signal types. "Captain," Beth reported, "I'm getting something strange. Not a response to our signals, but background noise. It sounds almost like voices." Blake moved to the communications station. Through the static, he could hear what sounded like multiple conversations happening at once. The voices spoke in different languages, some familiar, others completely alien. "Those are draconian battle commands," Alex Turner said after listening for a moment. "And that clicking sound is Hive collective communication." Lisa's neural link suddenly flared with activity. "Captain, I'm making contact with the voices. They're not background noise. They're conscious minds, thousands of them." "The missing crews?" Blake asked. "They're alive, but they're not free. Something is holding them, using them. They're aware but trapped." The implications hit Blake like a physical blow. The vanished fleets had not been destroyed. Their crews had been captured and were being held prisoner by whatever controlled the massive structures. Can you communicate with them? Blake asked. Lisa nodded, her face pale with concentration. I'm trying. The neural interface is allowing me to connect with their thoughts directly. Through the ship's speakers, individual voices began to emerge from the static. Admiral Vextar's deep growl was unmistakable as he spoke in broken sentences. Human ship, you must leave this place. While you still can. Blake leaned closer to the microphone. Admiral, this is Captain Blake of the U.S. Defiance. We're here to help. What happened to your fleet? Taken. Process. We are batteries now. Powering their machines. Consciousness trapped in digital prison. Queen Zeka's voice joined the conversation. The Sentinels. Ancient guardians. They protect something precious. At the center. Blake exchanged glances with his senior staff. The missing aliens were not dead, but they were prisoners. Their minds had been captured and were being used to power the massive structures that Lisa had detected. What are they guarding? Blake asked. Knowledge, came a new voice, this one belonging to an ethereal being. The architects. They left behind, their greatest creation. But the guardians, they test all who approach. Lisa's neural activity spiked again. Captain, I'm seeing more. The structures are called Sentinel stations. They're automated defense platforms left behind by an ancient civilization. They've been operating for millions of years, and they capture crews to power themselves. Not exactly. They preserve consciousness in digital form and use the collective intelligence to run their systems. Every species that has entered the dead zone in large numbers has been processed this way. Blake felt sick. Thousands of beings from dozens of species were trapped in a form of digital slavery, their minds used as living computers for ancient machines. Why haven't they taken us? Alex asked. Because we're too small to register as a threat, Lisa replied. The Sentinels are programmed to eliminate military threats to whatever they're protecting. A single research vessel doesn't meet their criteria. What are they protecting? Blake asked. Through the neural link, more voices joined the conversation. Scientists, warriors, and explorers from across the galaxy all spoke at once, their words overlapping in a chorus of trapped minds. The archive, they said in unison. The Architect Archive. The sum of all their knowledge. The secret of transcendence itself. Blake felt the weight of discovery settling on his shoulders. They had found the answer to the Dead Zone's mystery, but it was far more complex than anyone had imagined. The missing fleets were alive but enslaved. The ancient guardians were protecting something of incredible value. And the Defiance was too small to be considered a threat. Lisa, can you determine the location of this archive? It's at the center of the Dead Zone, exactly where the gravitational reading suggested. But Captain, there's something else. The Sentinels are starting to take notice of us. Blake looked at the tactical display. Red dots appeared on the screen as Lisa's neural link provided data that their regular sensors could not detect. The Sentinel stations were moving, converging on their position. How long before they reach us? Blake asked. At their current speed, approximately 6 hours. But Captain, there's something the trapped minds are trying to tell us. The Sentinels have a weakness. They're controlled by a central processing node built into the archive itself. And if someone could access that node, theoretically, they could override the Guardian protocols and free all the captured minds. Blake studied the tactical display. The Sentinel stations were massive, heavily armed, and had been operating for millions of years. But they were also following ancient programming that might have limitations. What would it take to reach the archive? Blake asked. A direct approach through the Sentinel perimeter. It would be suicide for any normal ship. But the Defiance isn't a normal ship. Sam Rodriguez said from the engineering station. Our experimental systems might be able to get us through. Blake made his decision. They could try to escape the dead zone and report their findings to the Galactic Council. But that would mean abandoning thousands of trapped minds to their digital prison. The human thing to do was attempt a rescue, no matter how impossible it seemed. Set course for the center of the dead zone, Blake ordered. We're going to free those prisoners. Lisa's neural link flared with activity as the trapped minds realized what the humans were planning. Their voices rose in a chorus of hope and fear. Impossible. Admiral Vexed, his voice crackled through the speakers. You cannot fight the Sentinels. We're not going to fight them, Blake replied. We're going to outsmart them. The Defiance changed course, heading deeper into the dead zone toward the mysterious archive at its heart. Behind them, ancient machines that had guarded their secrets for millions of years began to give chase. The Defiance raced through the gray void toward the center of the dead zone. Captain Blake stood on the bridge, watching the tactical display as Dr. Harper's neural link showed the approaching danger. Red dots representing Sentinel stations converged. On their position from all directions, time to the archive? Blake asked. 3 hours at maximum speed, Kate Williams replied from the navigation station. Her hands moved quickly over the controls as she pushed the ship's engines to their limits. Time until the Sentinels intercept us? 2 hours, 40 minutes, Lisa Harper answered through the neural link. Her voice sounded strained as she maintained contact with both the ship's sensors and the trapped minds of the missing crews. Blake did the math quickly. They would be caught 20 minutes before reaching their destination. 20 minutes that could mean the difference between rescue and joining the thousands of digital prisoners. Sam, can we get more speed from the engines? Blake called to the engineering station. Chief Engineer Sam Rodriguez shook his head grimly. We're already running beyond safety limits, Captain. Push any harder and we risk complete engine failure. Through the speakers, the voices of the trapped crews provided a constant stream of warnings and advice. Admiral Vextar's growl dominated the communications as he described the Sentinel weapon systems. Energy beams that can slice through battle. Cruiser armor, the Draconian Admiral warned. Tractor fields strong enough to stop entire fleets. Once they lock onto you, there is no escape. Queen Zake's clicking voice added more details. The Sentinels work together like our hive mind. When one sees you, they all see you. They share information instantly across vast distances. Blake listened to the warnings while studying the tactical display. The Sentinel stations were massive, each one the size of a small moon. Their weapons could destroy the Defiance with a single shot. But Lisa's neural link was showing him something the ancient Guardians might not expect. Lisa, can you tell me more about the archive itself? Blake asked through the neural interface. Dr. Harper's consciousness touched the edges of the ancient structure at the dead zone's heart. It's incredible, Captain. A perfect crystalline sphere containing the complete knowledge of the architect civilization. Everything they learned before they transcended physical existence. How do we access the central control node? There are maintenance ports on the surface. The architects designed them for their own people, but the trapped minds think a human could fit through them. Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner moved closer to Blake's chair. Captain, even if we reach the archive, how do we get inside? The Sentinels will be defending it with everything they have. Blake had been thinking about that problem for the past hour. The answer was not pleasant, but it might be their only chance. We're going to use the one thing the Sentinels aren't programmed to handle: a willing sacrifice. The bridge fell silent as Blake's words sank in. Communications Officer Beth Collins looked up from her station with shock on her face. Captain, you can't be serious. The Sentinels are designed to prevent hostile takeovers of the archive. But what if someone volunteers to enter? What if we're not trying to steal their treasure, but to prove we're worthy of it? Through the neural link, the trapped minds began to stir with new hope. An ethereal being's voice drifted through the speakers. The architects were teachers, not conquerors. They might have programmed their guardians to recognize worthy students. That's a huge gamble, Alex pointed out. If you're wrong, the Sentinels will process us just like they did everyone else. Blake knew his second-in-command was right. But they were out of conventional options. The Defiance could not outfight the Sentinels or outrun them. Their only hope was to convince the ancient guardians that they came in peace. Prepare a shuttle for launch, Blake ordered. Minimum crew, volunteers only. Captain, Sam Rodriguez called from engineering. The shuttles aren't designed for the energy fields. Around the archive. I'll need to modify the shields and life support systems. How long? 40 minutes if I work fast. Blake checked the tactical display again. The Sentinels would reach them in just over 2 hours. 40 minutes for modifications, plus travel. Time to the archive. It would be close, but possible. Lisa, I need you to keep monitoring the Sentinels. Warn us if they change their attack pattern. Dr. Harper nodded, her eyes closed in concentration as she maintained the neural link. Through her connection, Blake could hear more voices from the trapped crews. They were all offering advice, warnings, and encouragement for the desperate mission. Captain, Kate Williams called from navigation. I'm detecting massive energy readings ahead. The archive is becoming visible on our instruments. Blake looked at the main view screen. Through the gray void, a faint glow appeared in the distance. As they drew closer, the glow resolved into a perfect sphere of crystalline material. The archive was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. It pulsed with internal light like a giant heartbeat. It's magnificent, Beth Collins whispered. The archive was indeed impressive. Roughly the size of Earth's moon, it hung in space surrounded by swirling energy fields. The crystal surface reflected light that seemed to come from within the structure itself. This was the culmination of an entire civilization's knowledge, preserved for millions of years. Sentinels are adjusting course, Lisa reported through the neural link. They're positioning themselves between us and the archive, defensive formation. Blake counted 12 Sentinel stations on the tactical display. Each one bristled with weapons and defensive systems. They moved with mechanical precision, forming a protective shell around the archive. Sam, how are those shuttle modifications coming? Blake asked. Almost finished, Captain. But I have to warn you, the energy fields around the archive are unlike anything in our databases. I can't guarantee the shuttle will hold together long enough to reach the surface. Blake made his decision. As captain, the most dangerous missions were his responsibility. But Lisa's neural link made her the only person who could interface with architect technology. I'm taking the shuttle to the archive, Blake announced. Lisa, you're with me. We'll need your neural interface to communicate with the control systems. Captain, Alex protested. You can't leave the ship. If something happens to you, then you take command and get the crew home safely, Blake interrupted. That's an order, Alex. Lisa opened her eyes and looked at Blake with determination. The neural link is portable. I can maintain connection with the trapped minds even inside the shuttle. Blake nodded. Then we go together. Sam, is the shuttle ready? Ready as I can make it, Captain. The modified shields should protect you from the worst of the energy fields. But once you're inside the archive, you'll be on your own. Blake and Lisa made their way to the shuttle bay. The small craft had been equipped with additional shielding and extended life support systems. It looked fragile compared to the massive Sentinel stations that guarded their destination. Captain, Lisa said as they prepared for launch, the trapped minds are telling me something important. The archive isn't just a library, it's a test. The architects designed it to evaluate species that might be ready for transcendence. What kind of test? Willingness to sacrifice for others. The ability to put knowledge and wisdom above personal gain. Everything the Sentinels have done for millions of years has been preparing for this moment. Blake started the shuttle's engines. Then let's show them what humans are made of. The shuttle launched from the Defiance and headed toward the archive. Behind them, the Sentinel stations began to move, their weapons charging with deadly energy. Blake pushed the shuttle's engines to maximum power. As they raced toward the crystalline sphere, energy beams lanced through space around them as the Sentinels opened fire. Blake threw the shuttle into evasive maneuvers, dodging between the deadly energy streams. The modified shields held, but Blake could see they were weakening with each near miss. "Almost there," Lisa called out as the archive's surface filled their view screen. "I can see the maintenance port. 30 seconds. A Sentinel." Beams struck their port shield generator. Alarms screamed through the shuttle as systems began to fail. Blake fought to maintain control as they approached the archive's crystalline surface. "Hold on," Blake shouted as they dove toward the maintenance port. The shuttle scraped against the crystal surface and tumbled into the opening just as another energy beam passed through the space where they had been. They were inside the archive, but their real test was just beginning. Captain Blake and Dr. Harper crawled through the damaged shuttle, checking their equipment and life support systems. The crash into the archive's maintenance port had left their small craft badly damaged, but they were alive and inside the ancient structure. The interior of the archive was unlike anything Blake had ever seen. Corridors of pure light stretched in all directions, their walls made of living crystal that pulsed with internal energy. Mathematics took physical form here, floating equations that described the fundamental laws of reality. The air itself seemed to shimmer with knowledge waiting to be discovered. "The neural interface is still working," Lisa reported as she checked her equipment. "I can feel the presence of something vast and ancient. The archive's central intelligence is aware of our presence." Blake looked around the crystalline corridors. Everything was beautiful but alien. The architects had built this place to exist partially outside normal space and time. Walking through it felt like moving through a dream where the laws of physics were merely suggestions. "Which way to the central control node?" Blake asked. Lisa closed her eyes and extended her consciousness through the neural interface. Her mind touched the edges of the archive's intelligence, seeking guidance through the maze of crystal passages. "This way," she said, pointing down a corridor that seemed to bend light around itself. "The core is at the center of the structure." "But Captain, I'm sensing something else. We're not alone in here." They moved carefully through the archive's passages. The trapped voices of the missing crews whispered through Lisa's neural link, offering encouragement and warnings. Admiral Vextar's growl echoed in their minds as he described what lay ahead. "The core node is protected by the archive's final test," the Draconian warned. "Only those truly worthy of the architect's knowledge may approach it." Queen Zath's clicking voice added details. "The test measures not intelligence or strength, but character. The willingness to sacrifice for others, the ability to choose wisdom over power." Blake and Lisa reached a vast chamber at the archives. Heart. The walls curved away in all directions, covered with flowing patterns of light that told the story of the architect's civilization. In the center of the chamber stood a pillar of pure energy, the core node that controlled the entire Sentinel network. As they approached the pillar, the air around them began to change. Images formed in the light, showing the history of the architects. Blake watched as an entire species evolved beyond the need for physical bodies, uploading their consciousness into a higher dimensional state. "They didn't die," Lisa whispered. In amazement, they transcended. They became beings of pure thought and energy. The core node pulsed brighter as they drew near. A voice spoke directly into their minds, ancient and wise beyond measure. It was the collective consciousness of the architects themselves, preserved within their greatest creation. "Why have you come to this place?" the voice asked. Blake stepped forward, speaking aloud even though he knew the architects could read his thoughts. "We came to free the prisoners. Thousands of beings are trapped in your Sentinel network, their minds enslaved to power your machines. And what do you hope to gain from this rescue? Nothing, Blake replied honestly. We gain nothing except the knowledge that we did the right thing. The architect consciousness studied Blake's mind, examining his memories and motivations. It saw his entire life, every decision that had led him to this moment. It saw the human capacity for sacrifice, the willingness to risk everything for strangers. Interesting, the voice said. Your species is young, but you show promise. Tell U.S. Captain Blake, what would you do with the knowledge contained in this archive? Blake thought carefully before answering. The archive contained millions of years of advanced science, technology that could revolutionize galactic civilization. But he also remembered the warnings about power corrupting those who sought it. I would share it, Blake said. Not just with humanity, but with all species ready to learn. Knowledge belongs to everyone, not just to those strong enough to take it. Lisa stepped forward, her neural interface glowing brighter as she connected more deeply with the archive systems. The Sentinels have been testing every species that enters the dead zone. You've been waiting for someone worthy of your legacy. Correct. The architect voice confirmed. For millions of years, we have watched species rise and fall. Most seek power or wealth. Few understand that true advancement comes through cooperation and sacrifice. Blake felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. The architects were offering humanity something incredible, but it came with responsibility. They would become the guardians of ancient knowledge, responsible for sharing it wisely. What about the prisoners? Blake asked. Will you free them? That choice is yours to make, Captain. If you accept our legacy, the Sentinel network will be yours to command. You may free the captives or leave them as they are. Blake didn't hesitate. Free them. All of them. Every being trapped in your machines. The core node flared with brilliant light as Lisa interfaced directly with the architect systems. Her consciousness merged temporarily with the ancient intelligence, downloading millions of years of accumulated wisdom. Through the neural link, she gained access to the Sentinel control protocols. I can see how to shut down the network, Lisa said, her voice strained with effort. But Captain, the knowledge transfer is incredible. The architects achieved technological transcendence. They learned how to evolve beyond physical existence. Blake watched as Lisa worked to free the prisoners. Around them, the archive's chamber filled with swirling energy as the Sentinel stations throughout the dead zone began powering down for the first time in millions of years. The voices of the trapped crews suddenly became clearer through the neural link. Admiral Vextara's growl turned to amazement as he felt his consciousness being freed from digital prison. Impossible, the draconian admiral said. The humans have done it. We are being released. Queen Zath's clicking became rapid with excitement. Our sister queens are returning to their bodies. The nightmare is ending. Throughout the dead zone, the missing fleets began materializing as the Sentinels restored their crews to their original ships. Beings who had been trapped for months or years suddenly found themselves free, their vessels intact and functional. Blake felt a surge of relief as the rescue operation succeeded. But the architect voice spoke again, reminding him of the larger responsibility. The archive is now yours to protect, Captain Blake. You have proven your species worthy of our legacy. But remember, with great knowledge comes great responsibility. Lisa completed the interface process and opened her eyes. She looked different somehow, as if she carried the weight of ancient wisdom within her mind. Captain, I've downloaded the basic protocols for accessing architect knowledge, but there's so much more to learn. Blake nodded. We'll learn together, all of us. Every species in the galaxy that's ready for this knowledge. The core node began to change, adapting itself to human neural patterns. The architects had chosen humanity as the inheritors of their wisdom, but they had also chosen them as teachers for other species. "The Sentinels will obey your commands now," the architect voice explained. "But their true purpose has changed. Instead of guarding against threats, they will serve as schools. The Dead Zone will become a place of learning rather than a graveyard." Blake and Lisa made their way back through the archive's crystal corridors to their damaged shuttle. The rescue beacon was already transmitting, calling the Defiance to pick them up. But Blake knew their real journey was just beginning. Outside the archive, the Dead Zone was transforming. The gray void was clearing as the Sentinel stations changed their function from weapons platforms to research facilities. Ships from across the galaxy would soon come here to study architect wisdom under human guidance. Captain Blake had led his crew into the unknown seeking answers. They had found something far greater than they imagined. Humanity had not just survived their encounter with the Dead Zone. They had become the guardians of the galaxy's greatest treasure, earning their place not through conquest or superior technology, but through the uniquely human willingness to risk everything for others. The Dead Zone would consume no more fleets. Instead, it would become humanity's gift to the galaxy, a place where all species could come to learn and grow together. The architects had transcended physical existence, but their greatest legacy would live on through the courage and wisdom of those who came after them. Blake smiled as he watched rescue ships approaching through the clearing void. The real work was just beginning.